Hey everyone, this is Jen and you're watching BPD Woman. On this channel, you will learn how to more effectively live with your borderline personality disorder. If you are a person who deals with CPTSD, or if you are a person who has a hard time managing emotions, or you consider yourself highly sensitive, you are also in the right place. On this channel, I offer positive, solution-based approaches to recovery. Sharing my own experience from living with, managing, and recovering from BPD since being diagnosed about 21 years ago. I share my insights, tips, personal experiences, along with relying heavily on resources like DBT, that is the official modality for treating borderline personality disorder. Although I've seen all types of people in diagnoses, and not all of them need to be BPD in order to be enrolled in that class. And while I am not a therapist or a psychologist, I can answer one question that about 99% of those folks cannot, which is, what is it like to have borderline personality disorder? Just remember, they might have the degree, but they don't have the disorder. And so while their information is incredibly helpful and without them, I wouldn't have been where I am today in recovery, but they also don't know what it's like to live with it. And I'm also going to share with you on this channel things that they didn't tell me that I have realized would have helped me had I been told along my way. So hoping that that will expedite your recovery time. If you are also a person who is a family member, coworker, someone who's just interested in the disorder, you're also in the right place. If you are interested in a positive solution-based approach, then please do hit subscribe and the bell below. Just takes a second. You know what to do. I produce anywhere from 3 to 5 videos each week, all on something new. So today I'm going to be a little bit more informally, I'm not going to heavily edit this video today as you normally see my videos, but I wanted to put this out here. I haven't made a video in a few days, and I want to talk today about something very important, and that is trauma, borderline, and terrorist attacks. Why am I talking about this? Well, I think you might, excuse me, I'm still very tired, so I'm going to catch up on coffee here. I live in the Metro DC area. I have lived here about almost 2 decades now, so a long time. I've seen a lot of things here. And the DC metro area is DC, Northern Virginia, and Maryland, so it's a huge area. And I have lived through 9/11. I wasn't living in DC during the 9/11 attacks, but I was living here during the DC sniper. I was living here during the anthrax attacks that were sent to the Rayburn building and to different members of Congress. And 2 days ago, I was here very close when the insurrection happened at the Capitol building. And I want to talk today about how things like that really affect those of us with BPD or emotionally dysregulation issues. So many of you, I gather from your comments and just interacting with some of you, I gather that most of you are probably between the ages of 25 and 35. I'm 41 and there's no age limit to this channel, but I say this as a reference because if you are under the age of 37, then you weren't technically an adult during 9/11. And so probably some of the things that happened during that time, you were, sheltered from your family, or you have kind of maybe a vague, especially if you were under 10 years old, you might have more of a vague memory of what happened. For me, I have dated someone who, responded to I was married actually to someone who responded to later some of the activity around the Pentagon attacks. I dated and lived with someone who was a New York City New York City police officer that responded to the carnage at Ground Zero. And so, but more importantly, when 9/11 happened, it was a very similar situation as to what happened to me a few days ago. And that was that I didn't have my TV on. I don't really watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of not live TV. I watch a lot of documentaries or movies or things like that, and generally later at night when I'm done with work. But you know, back then, my boyfriend and I didn't have a TV in 2001. I was living in South Carolina. A friend called me, but I was like, not now, not now. This is about 8:30 a.m., 9 a.m. I was like, not now, not now. I'm really busy. I'll call you a little bit later. So then eventually when I called her at 11 a.m., I said, hey, Kristen, what's up? And she's like, oh, well, do you know that the towers are gone? And I was like, what? Like, to hear a statement like that, like, I mean, and, you know, for the next, probably the rest of the day, so we're talking 10, 11 hours, we just sat in Kristen's apartment and watched this coverage over and over and over, and the buildings being flown into and falling over and over and over, kind of something now what you would call news fatigue. And it's very upsetting, right? Even for the person who is seemingly very emotionally well balanced. And if you weren't, and if you're not all the time like I am, then it was incredibly traumatic. And then the things that happened to me and my boyfriend at the time, who was also a volunteer firefighter, and as you know, 343 firefighters perished in the New York attacks, then it hits a little bit closer to home. And it was just a time that was unimaginable, something that we clearly weren't prepared for. I mean, although we had intel, we didn't act on it in the way that was most effective, right? And a lot of carnage, and people lost their lives. And it was a very scary moment in history. And it didn't, you know, it wasn't over in a day. You know, I'm going to talk about this insurrection in a minute. But the insurrection was generally over in about a day or two. 9/11, I mean, the fires at 9/11 burned for months in New York. You know, people had flyers all posted. I mean, I saw them with my own eyes, just, you know, flyers posted, like, have you seen this person, this person? I mean, we're talking about walls and walls and blocks of people posting things, flyers looking for their loved ones. You know, this is before Facebook. This is before social media. You know, this, you know, I think at that time, you know, a Nokia, just like a basic, we weren't even into flip phones yet, you know, cell phones, those weren't a really huge thing yet. So, but what happened to me after the 9/11 is that very shortly thereafter, I was actually hospitalized, and after that hospitalization, during that hospitalization is when I was actually diagnosed with BPD. And so that's a very interesting intersection, because it took a highly traumatic event like 9/11, something that you weren't expecting, that was surreal, that shook you, that made you feel completely unsafe when previously you had felt completely safe. You know, we live in the richest country in the world, the most militarized, prepared, and yet that happened to us, right? So what else could happen? And I went into the hospital. I was my triggers, my cutting, my fighting, my drinking, my physical abuse to my partner was incredibly ramping up. And so I was hospitalized, which also preceded an arrest for domestic violence. Yeah, me. So, and then I, you know, was out, and then, you know, we all started to heal. But, you know, then I moved to the DC area at that time. And I remember flying into DC. My boyfriend and I lost our jobs down there in South Carolina. We were in the tourism industry. We moved up here. And I remember flying in to DCA airport. And at that time, and when you fly into that airport, you fly over like the Pentagon. And you know, at that time, like, there was still that big tarp over that section that had been decimated by an airplane. So it was surreal. So then, you know, shortly thereafter, we had the anthrax attacks. And then a couple years later, we had the DC sniper attacks. If you're not familiar with these things, then go ahead and Google them. But they were moments where we were terrified. I was terrified. And if you have BPD, then you already live in a highly aroused emotional state, right? Things that are a 1 or a 2 for someone are a 8 or a 9 or a 10 for you. You know, if someone looks out the window and says it's raining, for you, that's a thunderstorm, right? And so we're also very sensitive, and we have lots of empathy, right? We want to give, we want to help, we want to heal. This has been my experience with other borderlines, but I guess primarily I'm speaking from my own perspective. You know, we feel overwhelmed in this amount of feeling and emotion, especially at a time like a terrorist attack, which the DC sniper was. It was domestic terrorism, a former military guy going around with a kid, just literally picking off people with a rifle from the back seat of a Chevrolet Caprice. You have the anthrax attacks, you know. I have personally worked in buildings where we had to be, you know, the fire department was called because someone discovered a suspicious white substance that was mailed to them. Yeah. So, you know, this does not help, obviously, the heightened sense of alert, the hypervigilance, right? Like that looking over your shoulder. All that does is increase it, right? So now where you already live, it's sort of an aroused emotional state. You are now finding yourself in a super emotional aroused state, a super state of hypervigilance, an increased state of emotional ability. And for me, I find that those types of events are probably the worst kinds for my emotional dysregulation. And now why is that? Well, because those kinds of events are triggers for trauma, right? They remind you that you had to hide from your parents, or that you knew you were coming home to an unsafe or unstable environment, that you weren't sure what was going to await you from one day to the other. Did you have food instability, money instability? Were your parents unstable? And these types of events, even though I'm safe, you know, I'm at home, I'm not on scene, I'm not a first responder, I'm not watching these things unfold, you know, in person, but rather on a TV, they're triggers, right? They remind you of the feelings of unsafeness. They remind you that you're vigilant. And if anything, I think they reinforce this idea that you're never safe, and that you must be always hypervigilant, and that you have to always be prepared that someone's going to hurt you, at least from my perspective. So a couple days ago, it was very similar to what happened here at the Capitol building. And I was just simply, sorry, the cat's playing. No, leave it. No, drop it. Thank you. Drop it. Zena, thank you. Come here. Sorry. Like I said, this is an on-the-fly video today. Good girl. I was sitting at home. It was about 3:30. I was just texting with a colleague of mine, and, you know, he was like, yeah, about this insurrection. And I'm like, I never actually heard that word. I was like, do you mean resurrection? Like the Alien movie? Because that was a bad movie, right? Like, I didn't know what he was talking about. And so I was like, no, really, like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you need to turn on the news. So I had to start streaming CNN, and there it was. And then from about 4 p.m. till about 9 p.m., I was glued to my phone. And then we had a curfew, and I've never lived in a place that had a curfew where I wasn't able to leave or not be on the street. And so that was something new. And, you know, I was texting with my friends, and, you know, by the way, many of my clients as well, who are incredibly emotionally sensitive, that I don't believe have any kinds of disorder. Thank you. Don't lay down. They were also very shaken. And so this definitely affects all of the population, right? And I did find myself, Zena, leave it. Leave that alone. Thank you. Sit down. I did find that, again, the same thing with 9/11 was that news fatigue. I watched it over and over and over again. I was listening to all the commentary, all the conjecture. I found I didn't get to sleep till 3 a.m. that night. Yesterday I went to see clients, but obviously as I saw my clients, I spent more time talking with each of my clients about what had happened. And yeah, so I'm still very tired. Yesterday I was finally able to get some sleep. I went to bed fairly early, around 11:30. Didn't wake up till about 9, and so I needed that. But I want you to keep in mind that even if you're living very far away, as I did when I was living in South Carolina on 9/11, or if you live within a 50-mile or less radius of the Capitol building, which I do, I live pretty close to it, then you will find that these types of events are incredibly triggering for you, and they are incredibly draining. You will find most likely you have a hard time concentrating. You will, as I did yesterday, I was making all kinds of spelling errors, like I was getting my dates wrong with people. Now it's different for me because I have perspective. So, yesterday as opposed to 20 years ago during 9/11, I was able to say to people, I'm sorry, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I'm a bit distracted. I apologize. I need some rest. And most people were like, yeah, me too. Like I had a hard time sleeping too. So it's okay to share your experiences with people. If anything, it's therapeutic for you. It's therapeutic for them. You are not in a emotional bubble. Just because you feel these things more intensely does not mean that you are alone and feeling this way. And so sharing with people yesterday and help processing was very therapeutic for me. It's not something that I really had the tools to do back on 9/11. On 9/11, I was drinking more, smoking, cutting, really harmful, unhealthy, ineffective methods of coping. Now I'm better. Like, I'm still tired, but like today is, the emotional lability or that timeline is a lot lessened today. And of course, obviously the event at the Capitol building was obviously on a much, much smaller scale. But again, it's shared very similar emotional components for me as 9/11 presented, the off-guardness, the like, wow, is this really happening? Like, where's our safety? Where's our military? Where's our, where was the planning? And so you feel more vulnerable. And so remind yourself that this may be why you're feeling more dysregulated over these last few days, or maybe why you feel more dysregulated when a very upsetting event or news story breaks in a region where you live, and why that might affect you. Remember that you come from a background of trauma. You come from a background of ambiguity and not knowing what's going to happen next. You come from a place where you lived in a lot of fear and hypervigilance. And even though I've made lots of strides along the way, an event like yesterday is a trigger. And so that's what I want you to remember, that it's a trigger. And during those times, rely heavily on your care skills. Yesterday when I got home at about 5 p.m. or so after like my day of work, and I got into bed and I watched TV and I, petted my dog. I took the dog out, I played with the cat, and then I was like, all right, you need to get a good night's sleep tonight. So I got a really good night's sleep, and that's helped. So remind yourself of your cope aheads, what it is you need in that moment. That was not the time yesterday for me to like do all my dishes and, talk to a bunch of people on the phone. I'm like, eventually I had to put the phone down. I was like, all right, you're going to skip your daily chores today. It's fine. What's more important right now for you is your self-care. So I want you to remember that. And if you have any questions, or comments, please leave them below. If you don't feel that you want to leave a specific comment below, you can also email me. It's an anonymous email. I don't put my real name in the email. When I write you, it just says BPD Woman. But that email is womanbpd@gmail.com. So that's WOMAN BPD bpdwoman@gmail.com, and you can email me. If I don't get back to you right away, or I don't send a huge long email, don't be offended, but it is a place where you can more, I will communicate with you, I will reply to you, but it is a place if you'd rather post there than here on YouTube, that's totally fine. Although I will say that your bravery in posting is very impressive, and it does help other people that may be thinking the exact same thing or feeling the exact same thing that you feel. My name's Jen. You've been watching BPD Woman. Please consider subscribing, sharing, liking, commenting. And until I talk to you next time, please, and whatever you do, be effective. Bye-bye.